just yesterday we were last meeting and talking about this project, and I'm really excited to be here today to kind of update everyone on what the project team has been up to. I know we had some promises out there about next deliverables, and we've got some really good information for you today. We're going to talk through the environmental assessment, and we had kind of arrived on that preferred alternative and progress of those, the express lane decision, the noise study, and giving you kind of an overview of where we landed with that. And that is currently, the current status of that as well. Also, 167th Street, many of you will be very excited to hear how that has now been incorporated into the project, and how we're kind of preparing for construction and what future and continued engagement is going to be available for the team. So go ahead, Robin. On the next slide, I just wanted to recap with everyone. We did go and get the express toll lane option approved with the 3 levels of approval from the statutory requirements. So Overland Park approved the project with a city council decision, and then the KTA board also unanimously approved that option, and the State Finance Council as well. So there's a lot of support for moving forward with this alternative, and I know we will quickly recap how we got to that decision and the benefits of that. And with that, I will turn it over to Brandon. He is on the project team with HNTB and is going to walk us through the preferred alternative portion. Brandon.
Thank you, Lindsay. Can everyone hear me? All right, good. Thank you. Since we last talked alternatives, which was last spring, we have screened down the 6 initial alternatives all the way down to the preferred alternative, which is the express toll lane option. And to do that, we went through the process and we utilized all of the screening criteria that we discussed in previous meetings. Robin, thank you. How does the express toll lane alternative, how did that become the preferred alternative? It best meets the purpose and need of the project, and that means that it's the best at addressing the congestion. And that is through the use of the managed lanes. It provides the improvements to level of service and increases the overall corridor's travel speed, and that therefore increases the corridor's throughput. Addresses the safety concerns the best by reducing the congestion. We reduce those congestion-related crashes, such as rear end and side swipe crashes, and also those that involve sudden changes in speed. We also anticipate it to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety at those crossroad arterials like 135th Street, 151st Street. It does result in fewer impacts to the natural human environment, and this is really because it has a smaller footprint than most of the other alternatives, and especially the traditional widening alternative, because we can address the congestion and safety concerns without an expansive auxiliary lane system or CD road system. It is the lower cost solution. A lot of that is because we have fewer needs like auxiliary lanes and CD roads. And that's even when considering the added cost of things like tolling equipment and things like that. It does promote sustainability because we can manage that congestion using the dynamic pricing. We are better able to provide that sustainability. We're also addressing the existing roadway and bridge infrastructure deficiencies. The express toll lane alternative also, through the use of the managed lanes, makes travel time a lot more consistent. And when we're not having stop and go traffic, that speaks to that environmental sustainability in terms of things like greenhouse gas emissions. Provides flexible choices. By providing that dynamic nature of express toll lanes, we can provide that flexibility over the long term that we just can't provide with something like a traditional widening project. And finally, the toll lanes, those help accommodate local and regional growth by alleviating that congestion And relieving that congestion on US 69 not only helps US 69, but also other roads within the corridor. Next slide, Robin. So what are the impacts from the preferred alternative when we look at it from a environmental and societal way? So the project has minimal wetland impacts, less than 1 acre, and those less than 1 acre of wetland impacts, those will be mitigated through the use of a mitigation bank prior to construction commencing. You'll note there it talks about stream and floodplain impacts in the corridor. Those are not anticipated to have, the project is anticipated to receive a no-rise certification, which means that we're not raising the flood level with those impacts. Right-of-way impacts, we do have about 15 acres of right-of-way acquisition. However, with that, we only have 1 displacement, and it's a residence on 167th Street. And finally, we have no permanent impacts to recreational facilities, the parks, the trails within the corridor. We anticipate a de minimis finding from FHWA on all those impacts, and de minimis is just a fancy way of saying that the project will not adversely affect any activities, feature, or attributes of those recreational facilities. So also as part of the environmental assessment, a noise study was conducted. That noise study was to identify the sensitive receptors and potential impacts to them within the corridor. And I think Cameron is going to walk us through that process right now.
Cameron, are you out there? And are you off of mute?
He's on mute right now.
How about now?
All right.
That works.
First on Zoom, everybody, so sorry about that. Yeah, like I was starting to say, thanks for being here. Appreciate you guys' time this morning. I think what we'll do here is, we know that the noise is one of the areas where there's a lot of interest. And so we want to slow down maybe a little bit and talk a little bit about the noise study results in a little more detail. I mean, as we interacted with this group, certainly with the city council, and then really anytime there was a public interaction, I would say that, you know, other than tolling, noise is probably the element of the project where there's the most interest and certainly the most passion around it. And so we want to spend a little bit of time on that. I guess I would just say, as evidence of that, you know, up until this point, there really has not been any, I'll say, organized opposition or interest in tolling on this corridor. Certainly there's some that are not necessarily in favor, but there's no organized group. But by contrast, there is a group of about 10 to 15 homes associations that have organized, and they formed this group called Sound Off 69, which I think is actually a pretty creative name for that group. And that group's sole purpose is to advocate for noise abatement on the project. And so they've been very good to work with. For the most part, we've had several meetings with them and a lot of correspondence with that group. But the point is that it stands to show that this is something where there's a lot of interest and a lot of passion. So I want to spend a few minutes kind of going through that. We can go to the next slide, Robin.
Hey, Cameron, we had a chat question. And so I don't know if you want to answer that now or if you want to keep moving.
Let's see here. So we know of 1 residence impacted by the falls in the category. So Brandon might be able to answer that better than I am. Brandon, can you see that question about whether or not the resident of that displacement is limited or fixed income?
Yeah, Cameron. So we know that
I think that it doesn't fall within an EJ defined block group. Is that true?
that is correct. It does not fall into an EJ block group. At this point, all we can do is rely on the existing regulations that would provide assistance for them to find suitable housing. So I don't have a specific answer if they fall into that category or not, but that we'll learn that as we go through the acquisition process.
I guess my question is the acquisition process, sometimes you can, I don't know if they still call it condemning the land or whatever to get the right of way. And then there's limited financial responsibility, right? The jurisdiction has in compensating the individual to find suitable alternative elsewhere. I guess I'd like to understand the methodology, the vehicle by which you're going to access the land.
Yeah, so the acquisition process would certainly start out with trying to negotiate a relocation or an acquisition of that property. The condemnation is kind of the process that you would go through only if you can't reach an agreement as part of that. I will say though, in addition to just the reimbursement for the reimbursement for the value of the property itself, there is, following the Uniform Relocation Act, as we would have to do on any federally funded project, there is assistance for helping them relocate. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to switch back to noise here. Okay, so a little bit about background on how these noise studies are conducted. So there's really essentially two sets of criteria that's used to guide this analysis. On the federal side, that guidance centers around how impacts are defined, and this is done at the federal level so that there's consistency in how noise impacts are identified and addressed nationwide. However, there's a lot of the details on implementation of this process that is delegated to the states. So KDOT's noise policy and their criteria guides the decision making on items such as, what is the level of noise reduction that I'm trying to achieve, and then are the costs of that abatement reasonable? That's sort of a state level decision. So based on those two sets of criteria, the team works to identify, who is impacted, what properties are impacted by noise, and then obviously the options for potentially mitigating those impacts. I'm going to switch to the next slide. So the first step in this process is really to determine what are the existing conditions that are out there today, what are those existing noise levels, and then predict what we believe the sound levels will become in the future as the project is constructed. And this is done, the main tool used for this is a very detailed software model developed by Federal Highway Administration, but it's always validated using field measurements to make sure that what's being replicated in the model is actually representing what's going on in the field. So a series of field measurements to sort of calibrate and verify the software model, but then the software model is what takes into account project specific elements like terrain and what's the distance between the roadway and surrounding properties, and then what's the level of traffic on the highway, are all things that are sort of built into this software model. I'm going to go to the next slide. So once the existing and the future conditions are built in this model, then we determine if various receptors, and a receptor is, such as a home or another residence, whether they're impacted. And an impact can take a couple of different forms. So first, are the existing noise levels already high? So for residential properties, we look to see whether noise levels are at or above 66 decibels today, is kind of that impact threshold. Or the second case is the project is it predicted to increase noise levels by more than 10 decibels, as a result of the project? If either of those cases is met, then that receptor is considered to be impacted. What we found on this project, and is in the vast majority of the cases, the first criteria is what's occurring. That being that the noise levels are already above the impact threshold. So we've been able to verify both with field measurements and the noise model what people have frankly been saying to us pretty consistently, in that it's already loud along US 69, but we've been able to validate that. And what that means is that given that that's the circumstance, this project is really the opportunity to do something about that and to abate that noise. So if we go on to the next slide. So we know that there's already impacts, but how do we decide what to do about them? Well, the next process is to determine whether there's abatement solutions that meet criteria for being both feasible and reasonable or cost effective. So a solution has to be considered feasible. it has to effectively provide a meaningful benefit to the surrounding properties in a way that can be built and it doesn't cause any additional environmental impacts. So that meaningful benefit that we're shooting for is a reduction in the noise levels of 7 decibels or no less than 5 decibels. So some perspective on what that means in terms of the perception of that to the human ear. A 5 decibel reduction is considered very noticeable, and a 10 decibel reduction is perceived as half as loud. So this target reduction of 7 decibels, really, it is a meaningful benefit. So that's kind of what we're shooting for with feasible solutions. For a solution to be considered reasonable, it has to be done in a cost-effective way. So for this project, we are applying similar cost effectiveness criteria as what's been done on previous projects in Overland Park on the 435 corridor, the US 69 corridor, which sets that threshold at 1,800 square feet of wall or less per benefited receptor. If it meets that threshold, then it's considered reasonable and cost effective. So our team has been kind of working to develop those solutions that meet both the feasible and reasonable criteria for those that were considered impacted. So in the case of this project, that essentially means the installation of noise walls in certain locations. And if you flip to the next slide, we'll kind of walk through what those locations look like. So the graphic that's there on the right in green shows the areas where noise walls are being recommended. And we'll walk through those in a little more detail here in just a second. But if you look throughout the corridor, starting all the way up at 103rd Street, down to 179th Street, we looked at a total of 23 noise sensitive areas, evaluating whether there were feasible and reasonable solutions at those locations. Of those, we're recommending a total of 14 different noise walls be carried forward for consideration and potentially for construction. 11 of those 14 locations are in areas where we're adding capacity in what we anticipate to be the near-term construction project. So that being the segment from 103rd Street to 151st Street, with the additional 3 being recommended for future phases when we're, where capacity might be added south of 151st Street. So, from a cost perspective, if all 11 walls that we're recommending ultimately are included in the phase 1 project, this is roughly about a $30 million increase in the project budget. If you go to the next slide, I want to walk through this in just a little more detailed graphic here about the locations that we're recommending for inclusion in the first project. So just to maybe orient everyone to these drawings, because they're a little odd to look at, I think. So if you look at they're oriented sort of with north on the left and going along US 69. So if we start up here at the north end, we're talking around the College Boulevard to 119th Street area. The areas with the yellow and black lines, those are the areas where noise walls are recommended, as they were found to be both feasible and reasonable based on the study. So starting here at the 119th Street interchange, again, essentially all of the residential areas, feasible and reasonable solutions were found to be possible in those areas. A couple of things to highlight. If you look north of 119th Street on the west side, the reason that there's nothing shown there is because there was a wall already built there with one of the previous phases of US 69. So one already exists in that area. Flip to the next slide. So you go further south, we're now looking at that segment between, say, Blue Valley Parkway and 135th Street. Similar to the previous segment, the areas that are adjacent to residential areas were found to be both feasible and reasonable. One exception to this is on the west side of US 69 between 132nd Street and 135th Street. There are some apartments at that location, but they are significantly further away from US 69 and found that they simply would not benefit from the wall. It was not possible to get the noise reduction that we were looking for. So what we did look at that area that's planned in the space that's more adjacent to US 69. And right now that's planned to be office and hotel space, which is not considered as noise sensitive as say a residential property. I'll flip to the next slide. So the last segment that will be included in this first phase 1 project is the 2-mile segment between 135th Street and 151st Street. This is primarily single family residential, but there is some multifamily residential, particularly on the east side of US 69. The Tall Grass community is one of those properties. But again, found noise walls to be both feasible and reasonable in this segment, where they're adjacent to those residential properties, and therefore they're being recommended for inclusion in phase 1. So 151st Street is that southern limit where the capacity is planned. That's the limit of the capacity expansion as part of phase 1. Again, I mentioned there are some other recommended walls down further to the south, but those would be constructed whenever there is capacity expansion in those areas. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, then from an aesthetic standpoint, what we're proposing is that the noise walls with this project maintain a similar aesthetic concept as what's been done on previous phases of US 69. Those have been found to be effective, efficient, minimal maintenance burden on KDOT, and very effective. So you're probably familiar with kind of what those look like, but here's just a couple of examples of, these are some photos on 435 and further north on US 69, just to the north of here, but maintaining a similar look and feel as what's out there today. Flip to the next slide. So the last step in this process, and ultimately what the last step in determining whether it'll be included in construction, is to actually engage with the property owners and tenants to see if these noise walls that we're recommending out of the noise analysis are desired by those communities. So this is going to occur in a few different ways. First, we presented some of the similar information as what we just shared with you here. We shared that with the Overland Park Public Works Committee on November 15th. So all this information they have seen. We will then go forward from here. We're going to present similar information at the public meeting coming up on Wednesday. And we'll also share some of this with the Overland Park Environmental Advisory Council on Thursday. So we kind of have a series of discussions stacked up this week. But really the big part of this is in January, we'll be hosting essentially 11 separate neighborhood meetings with the property owners and tenants in those locations where they're recommended for phase 1. So as part of those, we'll have this opportunity to meet with them and talk about, how tall is it adjacent to my house and where is it located relative, or where do we anticipate it to be located? Is it up against the highway or is it up against the right-of-way line, that sort of thing. But there is also a vote of the benefited receptors, so those that could benefit from inclusion of these walls, to see if they are desired. And if 70% of the votes are in favor of the wall, then we'll include it in the project. So it's going to be a busy January as we engage with those communities along all the locations where we found noise walls to be both feasible and reasonable. All right, I'm going to turn it over. Lindsay, unless you have anything to add there, I'll turn it over to you to talk about 167th.
Yeah, so one thing that I did want to add is kind of part of the noise conversation. And I think, Cameron and I have met with a number of neighborhood associations. He talked about Sound Off 69 and that group. One thing that I think was really compelling for them, and as the advisory group, I think you'd be particularly interested in, KDOT doesn't review noise of a facility unless we are doing an expansion type project. If we are impacting right of way, or if we are expanding the roadway, adding lanes, that kind of thing. And so we already know that there's a noise issue in this area. We already know that the highway is generating a lot of noise for those surrounding receptors. And they, understood that now's the time to take a look at this noise issue that is already in existence and potentially will get worse over time. So I think they have been very, supportive of this, and without this project, we wouldn't be, evaluating a noise mitigation strategy for the corridor. So I think just for all of you on this committee, I just wanted to make sure you were aware that kind of now's the time to address that issue, and people have been pretty supportive of this as an element of this project. So That's good news. And then more good news is 167th Street. So with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have been able to include 167th Street interchange. So for those of you that were kind of following along, and I know we talked about, could we get an earmark? Is there discretionary funding? How could we incorporate an additional phase into this project? What we have done at KDOT, there was not earmarks. There was not a specific amount of money that said you will build 167th Street interchange. However, Kansas will receive more revenue from the passage of the bill law. So we will see increases. As a result of that increase, we presented this to the city council with the amount of local infrastructure that's needed and kind of increasing the overall size of the project. We did ask for an increased local match to go along with this addition. This has been something, and I'm sure Fred and others can speak to the advocacy on getting this interchange included. But we have, I think within the city CIP, they have tried to get this funded as an independent project with KDOT, and KDOT never really had the revenue to be able to improve the bridge. So we're really, really excited to make this part of 69 Express. The express lanes are still the same as far as terminating at 151st. However, we will be able to take this. Currently, it's just a half interchange. We will be making it a full interchange, expanding that bridge so that 167th Street can be widened underneath, and additional connectivity on the local system will occur. So we're really excited about that, and this would be able to continue to meet our schedule by adding this to the project. That's not going to have any negative impact. We're just getting to that next piece and really positioning the corridor even further for the future. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is the funding partnership that we discussed with the city. We are putting forward $15 million in federal funds from the bill legislation, and then we will contribute an additional $5 million of state funds. And we're increasing the Overland Park local contribution from the toll revenues by 10 million. So it will be a total add to the projects, really taking it from $300 million construction to 330. And Overland Park's contribution to that then is $30 million. And what that does then with the actual length of time that the toll would be collected, we showed those two solid lines, right? There was the two estimated growth projections. The dark blue is the MARC growth projection. We did a very conservative growth projection just to kind of give a range here. So we expected to meet that initial $20 million contribution. We have added inflation to that. So we're looking at like a value now of 20 million. It would be about 26.1 by 2037 or 27.5 by 2042. So that's the base contribution. By adding this additional 10 million, we may be extending it out 3 to 7 years. However, and this I think is the most important point of this slide, Overland Park has been outperforming the Mid-America Regional Council or the MARC growth estimates for years. So, it could even be a shorter time period than what we're projecting on this slide. But wanted to make sure that you all were aware of that as well. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Cameron to talk a little bit about how we're preparing for construction.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, as we kind of look ahead here to the spring, we wanted to provide just a really brief overview here of what the team is doing to prepare for eventual construction. And so if you want to flip to the next slide, one unique element of this project that we wanted to make sure that we shared with you all, and we've talked about this in the past, but just to reiterate, is that this project is going to be delivered using a different delivery model than what KDOT typically uses, which is a delivery model called design build. It isn't KDOT's, it isn't their first design build. This is actually the third design build project that KDOT's done. If you compare that across all the projects that KDOT's ever done, it is a little bit unique. The reason why KDOT selected design build as the delivery model for this project, there's a few different reasons for that. And the first really is cost. Design build can be a very effective way to control project costs, often as a budget target is set as part of the procurement. And then the competitive selection process really highly motivates contractor designer teams to price that project aggressively in order to win. Kind of the second reason with design build is there's an opportunity for the contractor to manage certain elements of a project where there's challenges for the owner to control. And I think the best example of this is really utility relocations. So, oftentimes the exact locations of utilities are hard to determine ahead of the job. And really, sometimes you don't uncover those things until after you start working on the project. So putting the design builder in control of how those relocations are scheduled, how they can mitigate or avoid conflicts at times, it often results in fewer utility-related expenses and utility-related delays during construction. And this project is no exception to that. There's definitely some challenges on that front. But then the most important part of this project, in my opinion, why design build really has a lot of advantages, is it can highly accelerate the delivery schedule. We know how important that is to this project to get it done as soon as possible and as early in the IKE program as possible. And design build really puts the project in position to deliver the project on the fastest possible schedule. So we flip to the next slide. And the reason why it's faster is primarily because design build creates a single point of responsibility for both the final design and construction. And that allows some of the elements of design to actually overlap with construction, which you can see by that gold bar on that top line. That final design actually is overlapping with construction, which allows for an overall earlier completion. Design bid build, on the other hand, kind of a more traditional process, is more linear, where the design is fully completed prior to engaging a contractor. It takes a little more time, but most KDOT projects, I would say, or most projects of this sort, design bid build may be very appropriate, where the schedule is a little less important or less critical, or it's where the project is just simpler and there's less opportunity for the contractor designer teams to work through creative ideas to try and win the job. But for US 69, combination of its size, its complexity, and just the desire to get it done as quickly as possible, design build is certainly, we believe, the right choice for this project and what we'll be using. Let's flip to the next slide. So kind of where we are in this process. At this time, we've completed the first step in what is a two-step process for selecting a design build team. So this first step is a qualifications-based project for shortlisting teams that are interested in pursuing the job. They have to have the right experience on similar projects, personnel with the understanding of how to do the job, and the manpower and financial capacity to take on a project that's the size. So we received statements of qualifications from various teams in November, and last week we went through the process of finalizing the shortlist and have shortlisted that down to 3 teams. And those 3 teams will now kind of move on to the second phase. This next phase is a more intense process of working through technical solutions with those teams as they work to create a best value proposal for KDOT. So this best value proposal will be scored based on a combination of price, how they handle traffic during construction, a handful of other factors. All of that gets built into a proposal. And I anticipate that we're going to get different proposals and different ideas on how's the best way to build this project. And depending on what they can provide, KDOT will score those and will select the best value proposer to deliver the job. So the second step will begin, right after the first of the year. We'll start to have some initial conversations on technical requirements and things like that with those shortlisted teams, with that process coming to a conclusion in the summer of this year. with a selection of a design build contractor that will ultimately be responsible for building the job. So at this point, might turn it over to Lindsay to kind of.
And real quick, Cameron,
Yeah.
there is a chat that says, have there been discussions about potential construction timeline impacts due to workforce shortages, material shortages, lead time, delivery delays, continued COVID-19 impacts, etc.? And will contractors be asked in the RFP how they will address such challenges?
Yeah, definitely a very good question. Anybody that's doing any work in this sort of space right now, I think probably is starting to see just the challenges of workforce shortage, materials, supply chain issues are a big deal. At this point, as we've engaged with these proposing teams, there has not been a lot of discussion about the schedule that we are wanting them to develop this under, whether that is, they have not suggested that that's something that is insurmountable. It'll be challenging, there's no question about that, but as part of their proposal, they will have to commit to certain milestone dates that they'll be held to contractually. So, they'll be evaluating that a lot when they're putting their proposals together. And I think, I can't get into a ton of detail about how the teams have formed, but I will say, as we kind of look at the makeup of the teams, they have tried to, in all cases really, look at ways of maximizing their local resources, but also making sure they have the ability to bring national expertise, national resources to the project if needed, to try and make sure that they can meet the schedule. All right.
Okay.
Lindsay, you want to?
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch on, ongoing engagement then with the project. And, as we discussed earlier, we've had a lot of conversations with, neighborhood associations, community members. We know maintenance of traffic through construction is a huge thing. So we plan and are prepared for continued public engagement at a very high level as we move through the project. One of the next steps, and really it came out of discussions with this group, is pulling together an equity subcommittee. We have two folks, thank you, Julie Brewer and Molly Hayes, are going to serve as co-chairs of the equity subcommittee. They are both great leaders in the community, and I think can offer, independent perspective on how this equity issue may come into play for people in Overland Park and traveling through the area. We want to be sensitive to and bring fairness to, these potentially low income or other, equity areas of concern. And we want to reduce any negative impacts or mitigate those impacts as well. So I think, as we pull together the subcommittee, we really want to help define what problems may exist, and then, what are some solutions that we could bring forward with the project to try and mitigate those. So really excited to, be convening those conversations, and we expect, this work to be kind of ongoing for the next 10 to 12 months. Go ahead to the next slide. So this week we're meeting with you all, and then we have another public meeting on Wednesday night to go over some of the environmental review and the noise analysis. And then you can see there, we've got the 30-day public comment period on the environmental review. We will release the draft RFP for these shortlisted teams to start preparing their proposals. The noise discussion and that voting process is going to be overlapping here with that. And, there's going to be lots of conversations with folks as we discuss whether or not they want to vote to construct noise walls to help mitigate that noise. The final RFP will go out, and we will have another public meeting early March timeframe to kind of go over more of that. So, there's lots and lots and lots of work going on, and that public engagement is going to continue. So feel free to, ask questions or continue to stay engaged as the project moves forward. Okay, next slide. So now that we are here, we want to answer any questions or continue to have discussion on the information that was presented today, and would love to continue. So I don't see any in the chat. Any questions about, ongoing public engagement, about the noise voting process?
This is Fred Spears. Just a question. I was going to make a brief 30,000 foot view overview of this meeting at council tonight. Is that okay if I do that?
Yeah.
And I want to be sure and tell people about the meeting on Wednesday, the EAC on Thursday, and then the neighborhood committees or neighborhood meetings. Just want to make sure that I'm not too far over my skis.
No, I think it would be great. We want to get the word out that that these are, ongoing conversations that are going to be coming up, and we want, folks to be engaged and continue to ask questions and have conversations with us about impacts to their everyday lives and what's going on in the community.
Okay, thank you. I will make that announcement tonight then, and the new folks on the council will probably be surprised.
Okay.
Yeah, they may not have had the benefit of the meeting on November 15th where we shared a little bit of this.
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions, but I'd start with noise. So on your map, I assume that there was no noise walls up around I-435 where 69 has a ramp, elevated ramp turning west to go on to 435. So there'll be a lot of elevated additional vehicles turning there, which normally go in a different direction to the right. So I'm assuming there was no noise walls there. I don't want to be picky, but the 69 symbol was right over that area and I couldn't tell. I assume there was no additional noise walls that you were thinking of. Is that correct?
Yeah, Robin, maybe can you back up to that slide where we have kind of the cartoonish looking map? There you go. Yeah, we did put a symbol on a shield right over the top of that. So, but the answer to your question is yes, that flyover ramp that'll go northbound to westbound, we're not suggesting to add noise walls to that ramp, and there's a few different reasons for that. Number one, if you think about the curvature of that ramp, the roadway is actually super elevated back towards the southwest. And so we did not find there to be significant increases in noise from the ramp specifically. Also, that area immediately just to the west already does have noise walls that are mitigating the noise that's on 435 and the CD road where that'll connect. You got some additional, I can dive into that a little bit more, John, and talk about that with you if you'd like to kind of understand a little bit more about what was modeled there.
Well, I was thinking though that I don't know if you're doubling the traffic going that way, because you've got the southbound 69 that's going to be going, it's already going that way. And so you're adding a lane that could have, I'm just guessing, maybe double the number of vehicles going that way, or at least that's an estimate. And so it seemed like that might, and it's also elevated, so you may be getting more sound, although I'm not quite sure if it's going to be going down or whether it's going to be up, at an angle. But anyway, I would have thought that there might be something there that might be needed, but so that was my question, really.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing is that ramp doesn't really contribute a lot of additional sound to the areas that are to the north of 435. And again, it's mostly because the way that ramp is is angled is it actually sends sound more to the southwest than it does to the north. If that makes sense.
Okay. So I have a follow-up question on that, which is, have you done simulations on air quality? Any additional concerns about air quality, particularly in that area from
we have,
increased automotive traffic?
So we have, and Brandon can maybe jump in here and let me know if I misstate this, but generally speaking, the air quality, we actually expect it to be improved over existing, simply because right now there's a lot of congestion out there, and the thing that contributes the most is actually idling vehicles. Whereas even if the overall traffic increases, but that traffic is more free flowing, that generally improves the air quality. And so Brandon, Brandon, I don't know if you have any thing additional to add to that, but that's generally what we're finding. I don't know whether it's location specific like that, John, or whether it's more of a corridor wide type of analysis, but Brandon might be able to answer that.
Yeah, Cameron, the analysis was done at the actually at the metro level, the impact from it. And you are correct that the toll alternative has a lower emissions than the future no build would. So it's an improvement over the no build.
Okay. Well, I have another question if nobody else has any.
We have one more in the chat and then we'll come back to you, John, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Julie wanted to know that in the past, even with the communication efforts that we have done, there was still a misunderstanding that the entire corridor 69 was becoming a toll road. Any changes to our communications plan to keep folks, in the know on the factual information, and also with noise becoming a news item, is there an opportunity maybe to clean that up, and then also discuss a little bit more about the neighborhood group we're working with. So Sound Off 69 was a group of neighborhood associations that have kind of come together really on the west side of 69 and south of 135th Street. Is that right, Cameron?
That's right. Yeah, it was a group from 135th to 151st-ish. That whole grouping, again, as Lindsay said, mostly along the west side. So those associations kind of came together on their own. And we've had a couple of meetings with them. We've had some other discussions with a couple of other neighborhood associations. Yep. We've had a lot of conversations with neighborhood associations. We met with Tallgrass. We've met with some of the homes associations just south of 119th Street on the west side. So yeah, lots of interest on this topic, but they have not seen these results yet unless they happened to attend the Public Works Committee meeting on November 15th. Right. Yep. So this is very fresh information for you all to be seeing, and we have not, as Cameron said, communicated where the walls are recommended to any of the neighborhood groups. So that information will be coming out, and as Cameron talked about, we're going to be meeting with those folks, inviting individual receptors to meetings, not just their neighborhood association leadership. It's actually the receptor, so the homeowner is going to get to vote on whether or not the walls should be constructed. So we are looking forward to those conversations and moving forward with whether or not those are going to be included in the project. Getting that final scope identified is really important as we are looking at, trying to stay on schedule. There was the question in the chat from Bart about when we expect this project will be concluded. And, I know there's going to be a little bit of cleanup, but we're going to be open for traffic in 2025. So we definitely want to stay on schedule and keep all these pieces moving forward. And I think to your other point, Julie, about people not understanding that this is express toll lanes, that they could continue to use the facility without ever paying a toll. We continue to clarify that every chance we get.
and reiterate that, especially with the media, with the coverage of the city council meetings. And I know discussions around the community about this project. I think people hear toll and they just automatically assume a fully tolled facility. So we're working very hard to get that messaging out and really using all of that media interaction, whether it's around noise or whether it's around 167th Street, to really clarify what the project is and what it isn't. So hoping to have, good participation in the next public meeting. But hopefully, as we continue to engage with the public on how the road is being designed and the maintenance of traffic through construction, I mean, this public engagement is going to be ongoing throughout the whole project. So hopefully as people learn more and more, they will get that additional clarification as we continue talking with them. Cameron, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, the only
sorry.
thing that I was going to add is, the time period between when we begin construction, it's going to be 3-ish years before it's open for the first customer to actually use the roadway. So during construction, I think that the discussion will change somewhat from being less about here's the options that we're considering and making a case as to why the express lanes option is a good option or the preferred option, and we'll gravitate more towards, hey, this is opening in 2025. Here's how you use it. Here's how you get a K tag. What are the benefits of using a K tag and that kind of thing. And I think it'll transition more into education and the user experience more so than about here's the options we're considering. So hopefully some of that. I guess the last thing I'd say is you're absolutely right that anytime you say toll, it ends up people's minds go towards a completely tolled facility, or you're turning US 69 into a toll road. If you got good ideas about how to further drive home the message that it is express lanes and not a fully tolled facility, we're way open to that as well.
Yep.
Well, Cameron and Lindsay, one of the things I heard one of you mention is that your beginning meetings with the Sound Off neighborhood group have been good, right? Sounds like there's been good communication. So it just made me thoughtful of, because I know in my own neighborhood, I'm not far. I'm off of 143rd and Metcalf, so I'm not far from all of this. I've had correct, a lot of incorrect information from neighbors who were vehemently against this. And then I'm like, do you understand? And then they didn't. So, I mean, there's a lot of, so it just makes me thoughtful. A lot of homeowners associations, I think they use the same kind of management company, eNeighbor. And I'm just wondering if what can we all who are in neighborhoods that might be surrounding or close to all of this do to support this work? And maybe it's having a relationship with that eNeighbors who does the newsletter and all the regular communication, because I bet I would think a lot of homeowners in these HOAs would want something in their HOA newsletter that gives them regular updates about where we are in construction phase, if you might want to do a workaround, what's going on. I mean, so approach it as we're helping, kind of providing a service, but it also would be another way to get accurate information to some of the folks who can be the loudest voices in the noise about pros and cons on this.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I will say that phenomenon that you talk about, people's initial reaction might not be very favorable, but then you actually explain it to them and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. I get why we're doing this now. I would say, Lindsay, we have experienced that as we've talked to multiple Rotary groups, Lions groups, that sort of stuff. In the Sound Off 69 folks, the HOAs, we've seen that exactly play out in those conversations of just that small group setting, an opportunity to just dive in a little more intimately. People seem to understand it best in that setting.
Yep. Then we have one more question. John, we have one quick question from Leroy, and then John, I'll turn it back to you for your other question. Leroy's asking about projected project cost. So Leroy, on our initial estimated cost of the project from 103rd to 151st Street, adding the express lane and then the necessary improvements in there, we are estimating that to be 300 million construction cost. 167th Street, we're estimating to be about 30. You know, obviously, as we get the RFP out and as the teams are responding, the teams are doing both design work and construction. So the total cost to the winning team is going to be much higher than 330 with all of the design work that would have to be completed. But the construction, you know, given some of the issues that were already brought up, you know, this project might end up costing a little bit more, and neither of those numbers, the 330 does not include noise walls. So depending on how these communities vote and what noise walls we'll be constructing as part of the scope of the project, that number is likely to grow. But we know that it's, you know, if we're building noise walls, it's a needed expense, and yeah, obviously the design work's got to get done too. So yeah, just construction. Yep. Thanks, Leroy. Okay. John, what was your other question?
Yeah, thank you. Let me just turn on my camera here. There we go. Yes, my question has to do with accidents. One of the concerns, I guess, is that with the old roadway, you have a lot of accidents, a lot of collisions. And so that's one of the reasons for expanding it, obviously. My question is, have you located where these accidents occurred so that area might be a accident-prone area? And then secondly, what suggestions do you have to make this less accident-prone road? For example, lighting, or reduced speed limits, or better highway patrol speed monitoring. So do you have any suggestions about that? And where did you find, if you found any specific spot, where was it?
So I can speak or as a driver. We have done a lot of safety analysis as KDOT about where these collisions occur. And it is the main reason why this project is selected and why we are expanding the roadway. I think, you know, where you see the slowdowns and the congestion points, you're seeing maybe low impact collisions quite a bit as you're, you know, traveling through that congestion. One of the things that, you know, I experience all the time traveling through this area, and I think is a location of several kind of rear end collisions as people are navigating, is as you come around the Blue Valley Parkway curve, where that overpass brings people in and they merge on the left side of the roadway. And then all that traffic is trying to get onto 135th. We have a lot of safety issue with how that's configured today. So one of the solutions that will be constructed as part of this project is to bring that traffic entering southbound 69 all the way over to the right side. Not only will that help the merging traffic and solve that safety concern, which was really the highest priority safety concern of the city of Overland Park, but also you're clearing that line of sight for the traffic that's northbound. So as you go under that overpass, there, by where it connects in, you don't see the traffic that's maybe stopped in congestion on the curve. So we're hoping to solve the congestion problem, improve that line of sight and the visibility, and also, you know, fix that merging location. So those are a couple of things that I am immediately aware of. And Cameron, I don't know if you have other examples of specific safety locations and how this project will address them.
Yeah, I think you hit the high points. I mean, if you dive into the safety analysis that we've done, the big two hotspots are the segment between Blue Valley Parkway and 135th Street that Lindsay mentioned, and then the other kind of hotspot is between, say, College Boulevard and I-435, that short stretch through there. And just globally throughout the project as a result of the improvements that are being suggested here. Reductions in congestion will go a long ways towards improving the accident rates that are out there, but also improving the entrance and exits, the way they're configured to say have continuous auxiliary lanes between interchanges so that the merges aren't so concentrated and causing rear end accidents and things like that. That's something that's really being applied really globally at all the entrance and exit locations. So I think it's a combination of just more capacity, but also improving those entrance exit configurations will go a long ways towards reducing predicted crashes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's 12:03, so I appreciate everybody's time. I will, if you have additional questions and want to stay on, I think Cameron can probably stay, and maybe Lindsay, I'm not sure about her schedule, in terms of answering a couple more questions, but we've recorded this meeting. So if you want to, share it with any of your friends or anyone else that would want to see it, it will be available tomorrow online, and we can make it available to all of you. Additional questions, we really appreciate your time. Thanks very much. So.
All right.
Thanks,
Hang out.
everyone. Have a great week.
So we just got a couple people left. So I don't know
Yep.
if Dave or John have any questions, or if they're just hanging out with us and want to just chat, that's fine too. So otherwise, good job with the presentation.
Yeah.
And
Got questions, let us know.
I'm going to turn off the recording.
Okay. John, David, you got any questions or something you want to talk about?
I just want to tell you guys, I think you've done a really good job. And I